A 1904 family portrait looks perfect until you notice the mother's hand. The portrait hung in the back corner of the Providence Historical Society for nearly 8 decades, lost among hundreds of other turn-of-the-century family photographs. 5 people stared out from the sepia-toned image: a stern father with a thick mustache, 4 children arranged by height, and a mother whose gentle smile seemed to soften the formality of the era. Everything about the photograph appeared ordinary. A typical middle-class American family from 1904, dressed in their Sunday best, captured in that stiff, solemn style that defined early photography. Dr. Rachel Foster had walked past that photograph 1,000 times during her 2 years as the Society's archivist. She specialized in early American photography, particularly the technical aspects of exposure and composition from the pre-digital age. On an unremarkable Tuesday morning in March, she was cataloging the collection for digitization when something made her pause. The light from the window hit the glass frame at an unusual angle, and for the first time, she noticed something wrong with the mother's left hand. Rachel removed the photograph from the wall and carried it to her workstation. Under the magnifying lamp, the detail became unmistakable. While every other element of the portrait was crisp and sharp, the father's watch chain, the lace on the youngest daughter's collar, even the grain of the wooden chair, the mother's hand resting on her daughter's shoulder was blurred. Not dramatically, but enough to be impossible to ignore once you saw it. Her breath caught. In 1904, cameras required long exposure times, sometimes 30 seconds or more. Subjects had to remain absolutely still, often using hidden supports and neck braces to prevent movement. Any motion during exposure created blur. But how could just one hand blur while everything else remained sharp? The mother's face was perfectly focused. Her right hand, folded in her lap, showed every wrinkle and vein. Only the left hand, that single element, betrayed movement. Rachel pulled out her camera and photographed the detail, then opened her laptop to compare it with other portraits from the same era and studio. The photographer's mark was embossed in the corner: Harrison & Sons, Providence, RI. She'd seen dozens of their works. They were known for technical precision and wealthy clientele. They never produced flawed images. She zoomed in on the digital image until pixels became visible. The blur had a distinctive pattern, not the smooth streak of a sudden movement, but a rapid, rhythmic tremor. It looked almost like a vibration, as if the hand had been shaking continuously throughout the entire 30-second exposure. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't an accident. This was a symptom. Rachel turned the frame over and carefully removed the backing. Sometimes families wrote notes or dates on the reverse of photographs. The back of this print was blank, but tucked into the corner of the frame was a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. A business card, ornate and formal. Dr. Edmund Thorne, neurological specialist, Boston, Massachusetts. Why would a neurologist's card be hidden in a family portrait? Rachel's mind raced through possibilities. She pulled the membership ledger from 1904 and ran her finger down the donor list until she found the photograph's provenance. It had been donated in 1947 by someone named Catherine Morrison, with a note: family portrait, personal collection. No other details, no names of the people in the photograph. Rachel photographed every detail: the trembling hand, the hidden card, the photographer's mark, the frame itself. She studied the mother's posture again under magnification. While seemingly relaxed, there was subtle tension in her shoulders. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and now that Rachel was looking carefully, she could see that the daughter whose shoulder bore that trembling hand was leaning slightly away, as if unconsciously trying to escape the contact. The more she examined the image, the more questions emerged. The family's clothing suggested wealth. The mother wore a high-collared dress with intricate lace. The father's suit was perfectly tailored. The children's outfits were pristine. This was not a family that would have accepted a flawed photograph unless there was a compelling reason. Professional photographers in that era would have retaken any imperfect image. The cost of materials was negligible compared to their reputation. Rachel began searching through the Historical Society's other records, looking for any mention of the Hayes family. The name had to come from somewhere. The donation record from Catherine Morrison must have included some family connection. She found marriage records, birth certificates, death notices, all cataloged in aging filing cabinets that smelled of dust and old paper. After 2 hours of searching, she discovered a death certificate from 1908. Eleanor Hayes, aged 42, cause of death listed as progressive paralysis. The address matched the Providence City directory from that year. Rachel's heart pounded. 4 years after the photograph was taken, Eleanor Hayes had died from a condition that caused progressive paralysis. The trembling hand wasn't just a photographic flaw, it was evidence of a disease that would eventually take her life. Harrison & Sons Photography Studio had been one of Providence's most prestigious establishments from 1898 until its closure in 1923. Rachel discovered that their business records had been donated to the Rhode Island Historical Preservation Society in the 1960s. She called ahead and arranged access, explaining her interest in authenticating a particular portrait from 1904. The archivist, an elderly man named Thomas, led her down narrow aisles lined with leather-bound ledgers and wooden filing cabinets. The studio had kept meticulous records, every client, every session, every payment, organized chronologically. Thomas pulled the 1904 volume and set it on the reading table with reverent care. The leather binding creaked as Rachel opened it. The entries were handwritten in elegant script, each one listing the client's name, date of session, type of portrait, number of prints ordered, and total cost. Rachel worked through the months, searching for family portraits from that year. There were dozens. Formal portraits were expensive status symbols, markers of prosperity and respectability. She was looking for anything unusual, any notation that might explain why a flawed photograph had been kept. Then, on September 14, 1904, she found it. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, family portrait, 5 subjects, extended session. The cost was listed as significantly higher than typical portraits, and in the margin, written in different ink, was a single word: accommodation. Rachel photographed the entry with her phone, her mind racing. What kind of accommodation? She continued reading through the ledger. 2 weeks later, another entry appeared. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, additional prints, 6, special handling. The cost was again unusually high. Whatever accommodation the studio had made, it had been expensive and unusual enough to warrant special notation. She asked Thomas if any correspondence from clients had been preserved. He disappeared into the stacks and returned with a wooden file box labeled 1904 client letters. Inside were dozens of folded letters, arranged chronologically. Rachel's hands were steady as she searched through September and October. Near the bottom of the stack, she found a letter on heavy cream stationery. "Dear Mr. Harrison," it began, "I am writing to inquire whether your establishment might be willing to accommodate a particular circumstance. My family requires a formal portrait, but I suffer from a condition that makes it difficult for me to remain perfectly still for extended periods. I am wondering if you might be able to work with this limitation. I am willing to pay whatever additional cost this might require. The portrait is of great importance to my family. Yours respectfully, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes." Rachel read Eleanor's letter 3 times, absorbing every careful word. The handwriting itself told a story, precise and educated, but with a slight shakiness in some of the letters that suggested the tremor affected her writing as well. Eleanor hadn't mentioned the specific nature of her condition, but the careful phrasing suggested both education and a quiet desperation. She knew her symptoms would show in a photograph, yet she was determined to have the portrait taken anyway. Rachel searched through the remaining letters and found Harrison's reply, a carbon copy on thin paper. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, I would be honored to accommodate your request. I have worked with clients who face similar challenges, and I assure you we will find a solution. I suggest we schedule the session for early morning when natural light is optimal, and we can take multiple exposures to ensure we capture at least one satisfactory image." The photographer's professionalism was evident, but what struck Rachel was his willingness to work with Eleanor's condition rather than turn her away. In an era when physical disabilities were often hidden or stigmatized, Harrison had offered dignity and discretion. But there was more to discover. Rachel asked Thomas if any personal notes or journals from the Harrison family had survived. Thomas nodded slowly. The founder's grandson donated some personal papers in the 1970s. Most of it was business correspondence, but there might be something useful. He led her to another section of the archives and produced a smaller box containing loose papers and a single leather journal. The journal belonged to William Harrison, the studio's founder. Rachel carefully turned the pages, scanning entries about clients, equipment purchases, and business challenges. Then, in late August 1904, she found an entry that made her breath catch. Received inquiry from Mrs. Hayes regarding portrait session. She suffers from tremor, seeks accommodation. Have written to Dr. Thorne for consultation. This situation requires careful consideration. 3 days later, another entry. Met with Dr. Thorne regarding Mrs. Hayes. He confirms progressive tremor, likely neurological in origin. Prognosis uncertain. Mrs. Hayes is aware of her condition's nature but insists on proceeding with family portrait. She spoke of wanting her children to have this memory. I have agreed to attempt the session, though success is not guaranteed. Rachel felt emotion tighten her throat. Eleanor had known what was happening to her body. She'd consulted with specialists. She'd understood that her condition was progressive, that it wouldn't improve. And still, she'd fought to have this photograph taken, knowing it might be the last formal image of her with her family. The final entry about Eleanor came in mid-September. Session with Hayes family completed this morning. Required 3 full exposures due to Mrs. Hayes's tremor. The final image shows slight blur in her left hand despite our best efforts. Offered to schedule another session, but Mrs. Hayes declined. She examined the photograph for several minutes, then said, "This is honest. This is who I am now." She paid in full and ordered 6 additional prints. I have never seen such quiet courage. Rachel sat back, blinking against unexpected tears. Eleanor hadn't wanted to hide her condition. She'd wanted to preserve the truth of that moment, trembling hand and all. But why? What had made honesty more important than the perfect image that social conventions demanded? The answer, Rachel suspected, lay in understanding what Eleanor had been fighting against. Not just her illness, but something else. Something that had made documenting her condition a matter of desperate importance. Dr. Edmund Thorne's name appeared in the 1904 Boston Medical Directory, listing him as a neurological specialist with an office on Beacon Street. Rachel traveled to Boston the following week, carrying copies of all the documents she'd found. The Massachusetts Medical Society's librarian, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana, explained that most physician records from that era had been destroyed, but that Thorne had been notable enough that some of his case files had been donated to the Harvard Medical School archives. The archives required an appointment and academic credentials. Rachel used her position at the Providence Historical Society to gain access, explaining that she was researching early medical photography and patient documentation. 2 days later, she found herself in a climate-controlled reading room, wearing white cotton gloves, with 3 archive boxes in front of her containing Dr. Thorne's case files from 1902 to 1906. The files were organized alphabetically within each year. Rachel opened the 1904 box and carefully worked through the H surnames. Halfway through, she found it, a manila folder labeled Hayes Eleanor, 1903-1908. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were detailed medical notes in Dr. Thorne's precise handwriting, along with several letters and what appeared to be copies of legal documents. The first entry was dated March 1903. Patient presence with intermittent tremor in left hand, occasional weakness in left arm. Symptoms began approximately 6 months ago, have gradually worsened. Patient is 37 years old, mother of 4 children in otherwise good health. Preliminary diagnosis, possible early-stage paralysis agitans. Rachel recognized the old term for Parkinson's disease, though the understanding of the condition in 1903 was primitive compared to modern knowledge. She continued reading through Thorne's notes, which documented Eleanor's visits every few months. The tremor progressively worsened. By August 1904, Thorne noted, patient's left-hand tremor now constant and visible, right side beginning to show symptoms. Patient is deeply concerned about social implications and family consequences. Then came an entry that made Rachel's blood run cold. September 1904. Patient's husband has threatened legal action to gain sole custody of children, citing wife's physical incapacity and potential mental deterioration. Patient is desperate to prove her mental faculties remain intact despite physical symptoms. Has requested detailed documentation of her condition for potential legal proceedings. I have agreed to provide written assessments and to consult with photographer Harrison regarding documentation of her current state. Rachel sat back, her mind reeling. Eleanor hadn't been fighting just her illness. She'd been fighting her husband, fighting to keep her children. In 1904, a woman with a progressive neurological condition could easily be declared mentally incompetent, regardless of her actual cognitive state. Her husband could use her physical symptoms as grounds to institutionalize her or strip her of parental rights. The photograph suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. Eleanor had needed proof that she was still herself, still capable, still present, still the mother her children knew. The trembling hand wasn't a flaw to hide. It was evidence to preserve. Rachel found the legal documents tucked behind Dr. Thorne's medical notes, copies of court petitions and depositions from a custody case filed in Providence County Court in October 1904. The plaintiff was listed as Robert Hayes, seeking full custody of his 4 children on grounds of his wife's progressive physical and mental incapacity resulting from neurological disease. The documents painted a disturbing picture. Robert Hayes, a successful textile merchant, had filed for legal separation and custody barely a month after the family portrait was taken. His petition claimed that Eleanor's tremors and weakness made her unable to care for the children properly, that she was becoming increasingly unstable, and that her condition posed a danger to their well-being. He'd gathered statements from neighbors describing her difficulty with fine motor tasks and her occasional stumbles. But Eleanor had fought back. Rachel found her response, filed through an attorney named Samuel Pierce, along with supporting documentation that took her breath away. Eleanor had created a meticulous record of her condition, daily journals describing her symptoms, her cognitive state, her interactions with her children, and her ability to manage household affairs. She documented everything, what she could still do, what she struggled with, and most importantly, that her mind remained completely clear. Dr. Thorne had provided a detailed affidavit. Rachel read it with growing admiration. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes suffers from a progressive movement disorder affecting her motor control. However, her cognitive functions, judgment, memory, and emotional stability remain entirely intact. She is fully capable of making decisions regarding her children's welfare. Her physical limitations do not impair her capacity as a mother, and there is no medical basis for declaring her incompetent or unfit for parental responsibilities. The family portrait was listed as evidence, Exhibit C in Eleanor's defense. Rachel pulled out her copy of the photograph and studied it with new eyes. Eleanor's clear gaze, her children gathered close, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder despite the visible tremor. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was a declaration, I am still here. I am still their mother. My body may fail, but I have not failed them. Rachel found witness statements from Eleanor's children's teachers, from her minister, from the family's housekeeper, all testifying to her continued competence and devotion as a mother. The housekeeper's statement was particularly moving. Mrs. Hayes may need help with buttons and writing, but she reads to the children every night, helps with their schoolwork, and knows each child's hopes and fears better than anyone. Her hands may shake, but her love is steady. The case had dragged through the courts for months. Rachel found multiple hearing transcripts, each one revealing the intensity of the battle. Robert Hayes' attorney had pressed hard on Eleanor's physical decline, suggesting that her condition would inevitably affect her mind. Eleanor's attorney had countered with medical evidence and the testimony of everyone who knew her, all confirming that her intellect and emotional capacity remained unaffected. The final ruling came in March 1905. Judge Harrison Whitmore, no relation to the photographer, had issued a detailed decision. Rachel read it with her heart pounding. Judge Whitmore's ruling was remarkably progressive for 1905, and Rachel could hear the careful reasoning behind every word. This court has reviewed extensive medical evidence and testimony regarding Mrs. Eleanor Hayes' neurological condition. While it is clear that she suffers from a progressive movement disorder that affects her physical capabilities, there is no credible evidence that this condition has impaired or will necessarily impair her mental faculties, her judgment, or her capacity to provide maternal care and guidance. The judge had gone further, directly addressing the stigma surrounding physical disabilities. A mother's value to her children cannot be measured solely by her physical abilities to perform manual tasks. Mrs. Hayes has demonstrated through documented evidence and credible testimony that she remains fully capable of providing emotional support, intellectual guidance, moral instruction, and maternal love. She has adapted to her physical limitations by employing household help where necessary, while maintaining her role as primary caregiver and decision-maker for her children. Most remarkably, Judge Whitmore had addressed the photograph directly. The court has examined the family portrait presented as evidence. Far from demonstrating incapacity, it shows a woman of dignity and courage who chose to document her condition honestly rather than hide in shame. This transparency speaks to her character and her determination to face her circumstances with integrity. The visible tremor in the photograph does not indicate a woman who is hiding from reality or denying her condition, but rather one who is confronting it directly. The ruling denied Robert Hayes' petition for full custody. Eleanor was granted primary custody of all 4 children, with Robert ordered to provide financial support and permitted supervised visitation. The judge had seen through the husband's attempt to use his wife's disability as a weapon against her. Rachel found a letter from Eleanor to Dr. Thorne, written shortly after the ruling, the handwriting shaky but legible. "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your support during this ordeal. The documentation you helped me create, including the photograph, proved essential to preserving my family. Whatever time I have left with my children, I will spend it helping them understand that strength comes in many forms, and that physical limitations do not diminish a person's worth or capacity to love." But there was more in the file, something that explained why Eleanor had been so meticulous in documenting her condition. Rachel found a series of notebooks, donated to the medical archives along with Thorne's files, containing Eleanor's daily observations of her symptoms. Each entry was dated, detailed, and scientifically precise. She'd recorded the progression of her tremors, which activities became difficult, what helped manage her symptoms, and crucially, extensive notes about her mental clarity remaining intact despite her physical decline. Dr. Thorne had annotated the notebooks with his own observations, creating what was essentially a detailed clinical study of progressive neurological disease. In a letter to a colleague, also preserved in the file, Thorne wrote, "Mrs. Hayes has proven to be an invaluable collaborator in understanding this condition. Her self-documentation is the most detailed record I have ever seen of the progression of paralysis agitans, particularly in demonstrating the clear separation between motor symptoms and cognitive function. Her courage in facing her condition and her scientific precision in recording it may contribute significantly to medical understanding." Rachel realized she was looking at something extraordinary, not just a woman fighting for her children, but a patient who had turned her illness into a tool for medical advancement, creating a detailed record that could help others understand and diagnose similar conditions. Rachel spent the next week diving deeper into Dr. Thorne's archives, and what she discovered was remarkable. Eleanor's detailed documentation of her symptoms had become the foundation for one of the earliest comprehensive studies of progressive neurological disease in America. Dr. Thorne had used her notebooks combined with his own clinical observations to write a series of papers published in medical journals between 1905 and 1909. The papers were groundbreaking for their time, particularly in their clear documentation that movement disorders did not necessarily affect cognitive function. In an era when any physical disability was often assumed to indicate mental deficiency, Eleanor's meticulous self-reporting provided crucial evidence to the contrary. Thorne had referenced Patient H throughout his papers, protecting Eleanor's privacy while sharing her contribution to medical science. Rachel found citations of Thorne's work in later medical literature, showing that his research had influenced the understanding and treatment of neurological conditions for decades. Eleanor's documentation had helped establish diagnostic criteria, had contributed to the recognition that patients with movement disorders could remain mentally sharp, and had advocated for more humane treatment of those suffering from such conditions. Diana, the medical librarian, helped Rachel trace the paper's impact. Thorne's work on movement disorders was cited well into the 1940s, she explained, pulling up references in a database. He was one of the first American physicians to systematically document the distinction between physical and cognitive symptoms and progressive neurological disease. His insistence that patients retain decision-making capacity despite physical limitations influenced both medical practice and legal standards. Rachel thought about Eleanor, trembling hand documenting her own decline with scientific precision, fighting not just for herself but creating a record that would help countless others. The photograph was part of that documentation, visual evidence that a woman could be fully present, fully capable, even as her body betrayed her. But who was Catherine Morrison, the woman who had donated the photograph in 1947? Rachel needed to trace the family forward, to understand what had happened to Eleanor and her children. She returned to Providence and began searching through city directories and census records, building a family tree from the fragments she'd found. The 1910 census listed Eleanor Hayes, now 44, still living in Providence with her 4 children: Thomas, age 16, Catherine, age 14, Margaret, age 11, and James, age 8. No husband was listed. Rachel found a divorce decree from 1906. Eleanor had successfully divorced Robert Hayes on grounds of abandonment and cruelty, retaining custody of all 4 children. Eleanor's death certificate from 1908 confirmed what Rachel had already learned: progressive paralysis, age 42. But the informant listed on the certificate was Catherine Hayes, her eldest daughter. Rachel's pulse quickened. Catherine would have been only 12 years old when her mother died, but she'd been the one to handle the death certificate, suggesting a maturity and responsibility beyond her years. Rachel traced Catherine forward through marriage records and found her married in 1918 to a man named William Morrison. The couple had remained in Providence. Rachel searched for obituaries and found Catherine's death notice from 1962, listing her as a retired nurse and noting that she had donated her mother's medical journals and family photographs to various historical and medical institutions. The pieces were coming together. Catherine had kept her mother's legacy alive, ensuring that Eleanor's documentation and her story wouldn't be lost. The photograph with the trembling hand had been Catherine's inheritance, a reminder of her mother's courage and a piece of medical history. Rachel requested Catherine Morrison's personal papers from the Rhode Island Historical Society, hoping for more context. What arrived was a single box containing letters, newspaper clippings, and a handwritten memoir that Catherine had apparently written in the 1950s. Rachel opened the memoir with trembling hands, and Eleanor's story came alive through her daughter's eyes. "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew," Catherine had written. "When I was 12 years old, I watched her fight my father in court for the right to remain our mother. Her hands shook constantly by then. She couldn't button her own clothes or hold a pen steadily. But her voice never wavered when she stood before the judge and explained why she deserved to keep her children." Catherine described the family portrait session in vivid detail. "Mother insisted we have the photograph taken, even though Father said it was a waste of money because she'd ruin it with her shaking. We went to Mr. Harrison's studio early on a September morning. During the exposure, which felt like an eternity, I could feel her hand trembling on my shoulder. After we saw the first result, Mr. Harrison offered to try again, but Mother said no. She said, 'This is the truth of our family right now. This is who we are.'" The memoir revealed that Eleanor had explained her condition to her children in age-appropriate ways, had shown them her notebooks, and had enlisted their help in documenting certain symptoms. Mother taught us that illness was not shameful, that the body could fail while the person inside remained whole. When she could no longer write easily, she dictated her observations to me, and I learned to write in medical terminology at age 11. Catherine described her mother's final years with quiet dignity. By 1907, Mother needed help with almost all physical tasks, but she continued to read to us every evening, to discuss our schoolwork, to plan our futures. She worked with Dr. Thorne until the end, refining her observations. She died in March 1908, surrounded by her children, her mind clear even as her body had become still. Catherine had become a nurse specifically because of her mother's influence, working with neurological patients and advocating for their dignity and autonomy. In letters from the 1940s, she explained her decision to donate her mother's materials. "My mother created this record not for glory but for utility. She wanted her experience to help others. Keeping these documents private would dishonor her intentions." The photograph had been the last item Catherine donated in 1947. A note accompanying it read, "This is my mother, Eleanor Hayes, with her family in 1904. The blur in her hand is not a flaw but a truth. She taught us that honesty requires courage and that love doesn't require a steady hand." Rachel stood in her office at the Providence Historical Society, the photograph back in its frame, but now mounted in a place of honor with a new caption that told Eleanor's story. She'd spent 3 months tracing the history of that single blurred hand, and what she'd found had changed not just her understanding of the photograph, but her understanding of the power of documentation itself. The exhibition she'd curated, Hidden in Plain Sight: Medical History and Family Photographs, opened on a bright October morning. The centerpiece was Eleanor's portrait, surrounded by Dr. Thorne's medical notes, excerpts from Eleanor's notebooks, the court documents, and Catherine's memoir. Visitors moved slowly through the display, reading Eleanor's words, studying the photograph, understanding that the trembling hand represented not weakness, but extraordinary courage. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist from Boston Medical Center, stood in front of Eleanor's photograph for a long time. This kind of patient self-documentation was incredibly rare in that era, she told Rachel. To have a patient systematically documenting their own experience while fighting for custody of their children and facing progressive disability, it's remarkable. This contributed significantly to early understanding of neurological conditions. Rachel had invited several advocacy groups for people with movement disorders to the opening. Many attendees stood before the photograph with tears in their eyes. One woman, her own hand trembling, told Rachel, "She fought the same battles we still fight, proving we're still ourselves, still capable, still deserving of dignity." That photograph from 1904 could have been taken yesterday. The blur in her hand looks exactly like the blur in my family photos. Rachel had also tracked down Eleanor's descendants. Catherine's grandson, Michael, visited the exhibition with his teenage daughter, Emma. They stood together before their ancestor's portrait, clearly moved. "We didn't know this story," Michael said quietly. "We didn't know where great-great-grandmother Catherine's passion for patient advocacy came from." Emma studied the photograph intently. "The blur makes it more real," she said. "If it was perfect, it would just be another old picture. The trembling shows she was human, that she struggled, that she didn't hide. That's braver than being perfect." Rachel had ensured that Eleanor's documentation was properly archived and accessible to researchers. The notebooks, medical records, legal documents, and photograph would continue to serve the purpose Eleanor had intended, helping others understand and advocate for people facing similar conditions. On the final evening of the exhibition's opening week, Rachel stayed late in the gallery, alone with the photograph. Eleanor Hayes had faced her condition with scientific precision and maternal determination. She'd refused to hide, had documented her experience, had fought for her children, and had contributed to medical understanding in ways that echoed through decades. The photograph she'd insisted on keeping, imperfect as it was, had become exactly what she'd hoped: a record of truth, a tool for justice, a bridge between past and present. The blur in Eleanor's hand wasn't a flaw. It was a testament,